Okay, now on to part 3 on this. I apologize again. This editor sucks, and will be the last time I try to use it. So we were talking about here at the end of chapter 2 is therefore a man shall leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife, because your woman is supposed to be an attachment to you. It's why you gave up a rib, and they become one flesh. They were both naked, and the man and his wife were not ashamed. Well, in a modern day, we became ashamed of this situation. Well, we became more and more civilized. We want to bring ourselves to that point where we're not running around naked, of course, and things like that. But in that same breath, we still like sexy outfits and swimsuits and stuff like that. Women like seeing some flesh and some muscle and so on. And tushy, from what I hear. It's their favorite part of football, and a lot of male sports, but football mainly. But here we see that God makes man and woman, and they're both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. Now this is a setup for the next part, where in part 3, the woman eats from the magic tree because the talking snake told her to. And now they find out that they're naked, like they didn't realize it before. It's a point of contention here, just like the thing that said that there were, well, even a modern day Christian epitaph of this idea, people to try to make it a literal story, by the way, out of some allegorical story blend that's going on here, written by some initiate that no one will ever figure out his name, although it may have been Moses. And not the Moses that we think of, but somebody else that was just an initiate, and they really liked his story, and it was a twist off of this other one, so they kind of put them together a little bit. Something along that line. But in this story that we have here, it's full of magic and allegory, and some astrotheological signs and seasons and all of that, having to do with agriculture and sun worship too, with the day and let there be light. Now we get into the depth of, well, how'd that all happen? Because this is all a setup, by the way. Many people have looked into this, and even theologians that totally believe in this say, well, God did this setup thing because he knew. Well, what's weird is once they end up eating off the tree of life, they find out they're naked, and they build little fig tree leaves, and that's the common picture we all had of Adam and Eve, or right before the time, and there's an apple hanging from a tree, and there's twigs just covering certain parts or whatever, a little bit of leaf coming out there, and retaining modesty to the photograph somewhat, sometimes. And then there's a snake in the tree, but a lot of times this snake is not even a snake, it's a serpent, which of course can be changed into or configurated as snake, but in the same breath, it's not a snake, it's a serpent. And in fact, he has arms and legs, and looks more like a slee stack from Land of the Lost, if you've ever seen it whenever I was a kid, or the modern remake of the situation of these lizard people. Of course, there are some people that believe in lizard people and so on. I made a whole video about that, and it got screwed over. I may have to go back and revisit that now as I think about it one more time. It was a second, but this serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Well, what's more cunning? Well, it's more magic and everything, and they somehow thought that this thing is more evolved than anything too. And where are we getting the snake idea from to this? Well, he was real cunning in the Gilgamesh story that a lot of this is taken from, isn't it? For he ends up sneaking up and taking this plant of life, which is supposed to take and keep you forever young situation. Tales of this is where we get the fountain of youth from, but also the Greeks taking heavily upon the ancient Sumerian tales, as I've shown a few times already, and of course their hand in the Bible that I did a series on recently, but also the fact that they have the same story about this apples of the Hesperides. and they're like golden apples, and they're where the sun sets, and that weird glow that we get in the sunset is them shining off of these apples that go on. But also from this is made ambrosia, and it's what keeps the gods unaging. But then Adam is supposed to have been an unaging creature. So here's the weird thing. We ate the apple of knowledge of good and evil, and the first thing that we would have done after that was probably eat from the other tree. If it gave us the intelligence of the gods, we'd be like, oh, and this is the one thing that we need. But it didn't work out quite that way. And in fact, God mentions that he takes it away from them, because if they don't, then we will be as gods. And that's twice they've compared these Caucasian people that are created from this Adamic story, created by the gods in their own image and so on. And before it says, well, if you eat of it, you'll be as gods. Strangely, I skipped over it whenever I was skipping over just a few places that I had done here. And I skipped over the part where it actually mentions the fact that if they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that is in the midst of the garden, so he sticks it right there in the middle. This is a total setup, people. This is like putting a chocolate cake in front of kids, which Adam and Eve are looked at as being innocent, like children. Just a sub break here off to the side. You know, the Bible is almost a look at that here when we lead into it, and that's what's supposed to mesmerize you somewhat. For whenever you were a kid, everything was all hunky-dory. Hopefully you had a good childhood and so on, and it was all hunky-dory. And then all of a sudden, you end up having to grow up. And through that turmoil that goes there, you come out the other side of it, and you have to work and toil the ground and do things like that and make a living and stuff, and it changes. And it starts to change in the ideals of what you have once Santa Claus goes away. For it seems like with a lot of people's children, myself included, they were way enamored in Santa Claus and kind of on the God thing, and as Santa Claus went away, God took over. That's usually whenever you're constantly going to church and sending your kids to Sunday school with these people that are indoctrinating them into all these things and repeating them over and over and over again. Not to go there, let's go back a little bit here. So in this story, it's a setup, and God says that we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, which is the one of good and evil. So it just says the one, and it does clarify that. So instantly there's two, well, there's one that's important, and then there's two, and I'm glad they didn't eat it. But then there's only one, and then there's two, and he takes it away. This is a double look at it too, by the way, and it actually shows you that there's this conflagration being put together. And many people have noticed this a long time ago, and a priestly source that had its hand in the middle of it, which would have been throwing in some astrotheological things and some of the other things that I've mentioned too, and twisting it into a story. And it really looks like the priestly hand that was in this are initiates of Sumerians, or what became Babylon. During the Canaanite captivity, which then all of a sudden they come out of it and they're supposed to be a different people, aren't they? Well, religion will change you a lot, but let's go on. So, and he says that one that's in the middle of the garden, ye shall not eat or touch it, lest you die. Remember that. Eat or touch it even, and you're going to die. Right? So it apparently skips a little part here where God gets lost, wandering off in his garden. You see, God starts out and he's actually walking around, traipsing, making noise, walking in a garden to where they notice it and so on like that. Then all of a sudden he's trapped in a tent and nobody can see him. Next thing he's up on the top of hills. The next thing you know, he's in the sky, and the next thing you know, he's in space and looking over us like that classical looking down on a snow globe, huh? Yeah, God seems to go away, the distancing of God. Got another video coming on that. Don't know which one will come out first, but let's continue here before I run out of time again or something happens to the editing. So, the serpent said to the woman, all of a sudden out of nowhere, like if he was right there next to God. So if he was going to screw something up, God would have not let the serpent be there in any way, shape, or form. But here we have that talking snake. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but talking animals are in fairy tales and not in reality, showing you that this is a conglomeration of fairy tales and folklore. It's not based on reality. It's based on a little concept of idea, and I don't know how people just fly past it and go, and that happened, and what's next? But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So we were apparently unknowing before this. So at the point that she eats it, she's still unknowing. And whenever a creature does an unknowing act, apparently that's okay. It's just when you're smart enough to know better. This is again the children aspect. Whenever you get up to a certain point, you know better, and there becomes harsher punishments. So you'll stop doing something because you don't realize what you do sometimes and what it causes or can affect. Sometimes you break Daddy's brand new keyboard, things like that, off of just trying to be silly. Weird things happen. Let's continue. So he's gonna, if you touch it or eat of it, you're gonna die. So when the woman saw the tree was good, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree desirable to make one wise, and like the gods, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Now here's an idea of whether or not she walked away from the snake and found him in the garden somewhere over here, or if he was standing there the whole time and listening to the snake conversation. And where did God go? All of a sudden, where he's omniscient, doesn't know what's going on, for in a minute you're going to find out that he doesn't know where they are. Apologetics say, oh, he's just trying to play up so they'll answer up because he already knew what happened. Well, if he's omniscient, he knew what was going to happen the whole time, and this was all a setup, and you won't be able to get past that in reality if you want to give a reality to this allegory. Let us continue. So when she thought it was good, she gave her some and everything, and then their eyes of both of them were open. So apparently eating of this special magical fruit off the tree supposedly didn't hit them all at once. It took a while for the pill to take effect, let's say. And so when their eyes were open, they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So here we go with the idea that all of a sudden when they became smart, we started doing that. And we actually realized that at the point of hominids, way back machine, before Neanderthal and so on, people were actually taking killed skins and wrapping around themselves for the cold and so on. So this can't fit the timeline in any way, shape, or form to what went on, but it does have a basis in reality, but it's way back in the, not even Cro-Magnon type days, but way back before then. Let's continue. So they made coverings, and they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Now what's up with that? God is all of a sudden corporeal. He's here. He's an entity, and he's walking around, and they can hear him walking and doing God knows what, whistling his little song or whatever, looking through his magic books and memorizing another spell, if you will. So, and Adam and his wife then hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees in the garden, so he apparently can't see him. Oh, I have to mention something here. There was a hilarious cartoon that I saw one time where Adam and Eve and the snake's there, but if you look on the back side of the tree, it's actually God with his hand in a sock puppet that looks like a snake, leaned over through the crook of a tree, And he's talking, we're going, oh no, God doesn't mean that. Da, 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 da. Doing it with a hand puppet. I thought it was just hilarious. If I can find it, it may be the opening shot. So they can hear the God walking around and so on. And he's not omniscient, because then the Lord called Adam and he said, where are you? So he said, I heard your voice in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So was he calling out for him, or they heard him walking? Sounds like we have a little issue here, but probably not big enough to go into depth on, but there it is again. And he said, I was afraid that because I was naked and I hid myself. Now we have this idea of naked again, and so naked is bad, right? Apparently. As soon as they became smart, they went, oh, we're naked. Naked is bad. So God created bad. God created them naked. He didn't give them skins. He's fixing to all of a sudden, because they need clothing now, because they know. So here's a big switch up thing. A lot of theologians have gone into depth about this. I'll just leave it right there on the fact that God made bad because he made them naked, and then had them go through this shaming event that he knew well was going to happen if you believe in the modern Christian belief on this whole allegory that's going on. So, but then God says something strange. Who told you that you were naked? So the first thing that comes to his mind was that someone told them they were naked. Now, people might infer that the snake did all of a sudden, or that they just realized it. But here we have this strange thing where God believes there's somebody else around they could have possibly been talking to. Maybe not even a snake, but a person. Somehow, who told you? Next he asks, have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you that you should not eat? God would know this answer and stuff, but I guess he wants them to go, oh no. The man said, the woman who gave it to me to be with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate. Well, there's a lot of people who look at this and say that she ate from it and she got opened up, and all of a sudden she goes, oh, I have to give this to Adam. Knowing that all of a sudden she became smart, the smartest thing that came to her mind right there is, oh, I have to give it to him. He's not even aware of things. This again harkens to magic mushrooms and all these types of things. And strangely, there's an ancient folklore that comes down where women are going out in the middle of a forest, apparently, and they collect mushrooms from an area around a tree. And whenever they do, they bring them back. But whenever she gets home, it hits her and she's all tripping out. But she gives some to her husband and everybody trips out. It's another version of this story where it ends up being poison and watch out for it and everything. But then that's a poison mushroom versus one that would be like Amanera muscaria and the red cap mushrooms that we talk about that are hooked up with the gnome people that have the little red caps on them, and the Phrygian caps. Let that stew here for a minute. So he's walking around in the garden, doesn't know where anybody is. And he says, what is this that you've done to the woman? The woman said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. So the Lord God said, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle. So all of a sudden, everything was fantastic till this thing that was a setup. All of a sudden, we're cursed more than cattle are, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and shall eat dust. Now he's saying this to the serpent. And you shall eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between the seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And believe it or not, this has a connection that we try to conflagrate in part of the Jesus tale later. Yeah, they take little important parts in there and try to put it out. But of course, Daniel's thing doesn't equate to him because he's supposed to be somebody that's outcast. But then they have that outcast idea on Jesus, where all of a sudden everybody turns on him. And they try to put that in there, but that doesn't equate. There's a lot of the things of the prophecies that won't equate together, especially with the name being Emmanuel and so on. But then people see what they want to see, just like whenever they used to see God's face in the clouds. To the woman he said, I'll greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. women have this waning thing, and they're very emotional, so on. So he's trying to explain it, and they're also in this trying to explain the origin of snakes, by the way. In your pain you shall bring forth children, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Well, everything's fine till that last point. And of course, in a modern day, and a twist onto it, women do not want to read this. No, it's not supposed to be. You see a subservient woman, like in the Orientals and so on like that, but you don't see it so much anymore. Well, of course, we've empowered women. It's a much better place knowing that we did, but in doing so, we're not following this thing, are we? Well, when's the last time somebody sacrificed a goat? I'm sure it goes on somewhere, people, but I mean, hey, just to be honest with you about it, how many people are doing this anymore? Any of this stuff? Well, some people are trying to hold on to the old ways. Yeah, well, some of us have turned into spaceman, and we realize how much bullshit that this was in the first place. I guess if you need training wheels, go ahead and go with it, but if you'll look behind you, Mama let go of the bike a long time ago, and you got it. You're doing it. You're doing it. In fact, the training wheels came off a long time ago. Mom let go of the bike. Everything's going. So this is supposed to tell you that women wouldn't have pain whenever they have childbirth. And of course, this is related to cattle and other creatures. Whenever they do it, they don't seem to go through near as much pain as a woman does whenever she goes through it. A lot of people look at this where the head of a baby too is so grown now for the brain that causes a big problem passing that. You try passing a softball. Okay, so then to Adam he said, because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. So all of a sudden the whole world and the ground gets screwed. And all this stuff happens, people, and the only thing that'll fix it is for God to turn around and realize it's all his fault, and he kills himself to help right the wrong that he couldn't right in any other way. And it's odd, but I've shown actually a video not too long ago, it's been almost a year now ago, where the Jesus thing is a correlation where God ends up being sacrificed because of all the humans that have been doing this sacrificing for so long that it had to been done, and so God kills himself. But people don't want to see that. God dead. Oh, he rose again. Oh, it did. Magic. Magic's when I'm fooling you and you kind of don't like it and you want to know the truth. Well, this is kind of like people have been fooling you and trying to tell you the truth. Trying to show you the magic trick right here. Whenever I do this move right here, I put the card on top anyhow, and then I say this one goes in the middle, but it's not. And then when I go, pow, and there it is at the top, and you go, oh, well, I can do this about 4 different ways, and so I keep doing it different ways, and if everything works out great, you never find out. How many magicians messed up their trick, and then all of a sudden it, yeah, back in the day. Think about it, it might be your life. Whenever all of a sudden you get caught at doing something, you try to show off for a king, and then a king stops you and looks up your sleeve and finds the thing that you were supposed to have had maybe disappear, things like that, and off with his head. So, cursed is the ground for his sake, and toil and eat of it in all the days of your life. Well, this is the thing about growing up too. First you're very innocent and so on, you don't know any better. Mom said not to eat the cake and put it right there in the middle of the table, and she's going, I'm going to go out for a while, but don't eat the cake. She comes home and half of it's gone, got smeared all over her face, and they start pointing at each other, trying to blame each other. Well, Eve doesn't really try to blame him. She knows that she started it, and then she got smart, and she said he needs it too. I'm not going down alone here. That could be one way to look at it. Could be the way that I look at it is like if all of a sudden opened up her eyes, she would turn around and say, this is my love and my mate and everything, and he needs to know all this stuff that all of a sudden I figured out real quick, or entered my brain all of a sudden, somehow I became cognizant, and he needs to be too, to a point that's extremely accelerated like I am. Like gods, it said, to be as the gods. Said it a few times there too through all of this. But all of a sudden they're screwed now, and this is supposed to be original sin and all that trapped into once here too, that people try to draw out of this, that it doesn't really give. Both thorn and thistle shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat herbs of the field, and sweat in your face shall you eat bread, till return to the ground, for out of you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you shall return, or ashes and ashes, dust to dust, if you will. But also earlier in this, they were talking about this happened way before this, that happened way before that. Well, in the start of the ancient tale of Gilgamesh, it starts out and it says the same type of thing. Long before this happened, long before that, long before bread was even broken, which is a strange dating, because all of a sudden now we know that there's bread dating back to at least 12,000 years ago, and then a bran oatmeal thing that was made is bread 16,800 years ago, give or take a few hundred years in either side chunk that they found where people were making bread. So if they said long before bread ever happened, so this is the bad thing that happens. So in Greek tales, there's 3 or 4 different ones of them. Prometheus brings fire to people. So in that type look at it, if you will, that's whenever, that's what makes us the difference between animals, is we harnessed fire, and it all came from after that point. And that's a truth and reality of it. But then also this one says, oh, it's when we got smart, but that's a bad thing, and it repeats it again with like the Tower of Babel situation, and there's no telling what they'll do. But that's also saying, God's saying that if somebody built a tower 100 foot tall, they'd be getting somewhat close and scared God. Well, that's because they used to believe that he was floating around at that point in the clouds. You see, at first he's right there walking around la-di-da and calling for people in a garden. Next thing you know, he's trapped in a tent. Then all of a sudden he's up on a mountain. Then he's in the clouds, and you have it here, and storm gods and all of that situation. So this is way late in the game. All of a sudden it shows up. But so Adam called his wife named Eve because she's the mother of all living. And again, that's hueva, which is into huevos, which is eggs. But then in Latin, but then also you can get the idea that it actually means whore. But again, it doesn't mean whore, it means sacred prostitute, if you will, or the starting of all life. Or man, she had a bunch of kids, which if you're a whore, of course, nowadays you probably don't, because of pills and medications you can take yourself from it. But back then you would have been the one that had a whole lot of kids, constantly having kids. Pump one out and it wouldn't be long, pump one out and it wouldn't be long, so on. But of course that grew the priesthood, if you will. So then after that it tells you Adam, and for Adam and his wife, don't mention his name Eve, which they don't mention much women in the Bible, but regardless of that, they made him tunics of skin and clothed them. So how does this happen? Does God kill these creatures, or what happens? Well, this is right after all the bullshit happens, so I guess death enters the world. So there is one school of belief that believes that nobody would die, or they live for thousands and thousands of years, like it talks about Methuselah and all those things in the Bible. But then all of a sudden, everybody lives a normal lifespan, that there never were diseases and things like that, but we were all vegetarians. I've actually seen an apologist try to say that T-Rexes were around all back then, but also that their teeth, which are serrated dagger knives, are really great at eating melons and things like that, and that great white sharks' teeth are made for cutting up kelp, and that everything used to be vegetarian. I'm serious. And they try to get people to believe this because it's what it says in this fable tale here, where it leads into people. Of course, we're looking at it in a modern perspective, and we can see things that reach back to 30,000 years ago, perhaps, or bread going back so long. And so, the Younger Dryas event, when there really was a flooding that came from below and above, kind of like the Bible. And you can bet it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, or maybe that's just a number they put on it. For 40 is extremely sacred in the Bible, and you see it repeated over and over again, 40 years and so on. It's a generation. In fact, exactly inside of Jesus' generation years from the actual date that he passes away, So when Armageddon actually happened, which has already happened, is exactly 40 years, going from Passover to Passover too. It's amazing. Got other videos about that. Let's not go there. But so God kills creatures and makes skins out of them. Of course, by the time that we're looking at this, nobody wears skins anymore, except for sometimes kings still have a leopard skin piece on them and things like that they're doing. But that goes in the Wayback Machine too, and we find that would come back from perhaps over 100,000 years ago. People wearing those skins like he's talking about and turned into that. But then again, if you tan it right, take the fur off of it and do so on, we've actually made leather here. And so people were wearing leather shit back then. Yeah, it's kind of weird because you think it's a modern day where somebody's wearing leather like that. Of course, they probably didn't have a suit like that. But then again, the extreme leather workers were the same people that had horses and so on. They made saddles out of leather. They made pants, yeah, wagons, all kinds of things. Sounds like the Wild West, doesn't it? Well, I've got videos about that and cowboys and everything else. But then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us, so like the gods, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever, therefore the gods sent him out of the Garden of Eden into the ground which he was taken. So he drove the man out and placed the cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So the tree was still there, and he couldn't transport it anywhere or do something special about it, so he just drove them out east of Eden over here, and then put a cherubim, which I've shown that cherubim actually is cognate to the giant Sumerian statue, which is showing a man and a bull with eagle's wings and a lion's tail. And if you'll look at that, that's the 4 signs of the zodiac having to do with astrotheology. That's a north, south, east, west, if you will, and so on. Showing an encompassment, but also that the people had that back then. But also the flaming sword I mentioned before is in the Gilgamesh story. That's where we get some of the magic stuff from. A lot of these old tales here have magic like that in them, all of them being pagan, including these, and where they come from and so on. And this idea that there's a flaming sword. Now you can heat up a sword to where it's red hot, and you can quench it in oil and catch it on fire. You can wrap it like a torch and catch it on fire and hit somebody with it and do all kinds of things. But this whirling sword, you see, swords come way late in the game. And in fact, in the earliest tales that we find of a concept like this, it was actually either a mace or an axe that had it on there, showing you as well before swords were come up with, and then a flaming sword. Also, again, dating this into way late in the game. But the gods had the newest hotness, didn't they? They didn't have it's a flaming sword. Oh, it's a lightsaber. You can make up stuff if you want to. It's not what it says. So there we've gone through 1, 2, and 3. And now we start getting into the Cain and Abel, and now he killed his brother, and so on. And of course, this has to do with sacred brothers and so on. Jesus had a brother, by the way, a twin too, Doubting Thomas. Thomas actually means twin. In fact, his whole name actually means twin of Jesus. Yeah, so it's his brother, Doubting Thomas. But am I my brother's keeper? And here we have the fact of God again not knowing what happened and showing up, and then all of a sudden telling me that blood cried out for your brother in a field somewhere. So this is some kind of magic-y weird thing. And that there's vengeance taken on sevenfold. And then there's all this begotten that starts out with Enoch and everybody living for a long time coming up, but then who bore who, and then all of a sudden he had 2 kids and they get named rather than just going single, and that's supposed to split things up a little bit, and one goes one way and one goes another. Eventually it comes down to Tubal-Cain here, and then Lamech said to his wives that, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech, for I have killed a man in wounding me, and young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. Using the magic 7 number that we still use for our week today. It's where our week comes from in the ancient Sumerians. Same thing with the 12 and 24-hour day situation going on. The 12 disciples, the 12 signs of the zodiac, all of that. The circumference of a circle is 360 degrees, and that's based on them too, and it all comes from there. In fact, our calendar is based off of that closely. So Adam knew his wife again after all this crap leads down from that. And a lot of people say, well, that means it happens after. You know, you're not going to interject. You know, meanwhile, like in a movie, and Adam knew his wife again and bore Seth, which we talked about before, for he's appointed another seed for me instead, and Cain. And as for Seth, him also was a son born, and he named him Enosh. And then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Yep, it's, well, whoops, right there. And it says it, a new son, bore a son named Seth, for God appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, and said, Sir Seth is also born. So, you know, this is like God impregnating like Mary and so on like that. And we are not sure if Adam's even involved here again, for the Lord gave him one. There's all kinds of things about it. But then Enoch gets echoed with Enosh, where the SH sound is cognate to the CH sound that goes on. So here we go again. Of course, you flip it over, that's Enki. But so here we have that as Seth, or Set. And Set again is in the Egyptians too, and it's all about the sunset and how it goes around the world, as we talked about in the Egyptian thing. But here we have the Set, and it's the very last. This is the end of days for them, for the sun, end of day, if you will. The sun comes down, and they had Adam and Eve, and Eve is supposed to have been like a dawn. Adam was created the day before, if you will, and then she is the dawn of the eve of the day, and she's also of the noon and going through. But then with Cain and Abel happening through the pivot of noon, and before and noon and after, now we have a strange effect where as the sun sets, we have the last one of their children that we hear about. Strangely, after this, you know, Cain gets banished to the land of Nod, where he takes a wife, and everybody goes, where'd she come from? Oh, well, women weren't mentioned. Also, he tells them that people are going to kill me if I show up with no mark on them. So there's all these people, apparently, they're out there, and they have no idea of all this going on. Another strange, weird thing in the tale right there, but God goes with it and puts a mark on him and everything else. There's a lot said about the mark of Cain. But we're also led to believe that Adam and Eve are the only people that ever called on the name of the Lord, and all that got done away with whenever they banished and so on. And then all these people that we got to talking about here got all the way to the point here, and it's only Seth's children who are the ones that men began calling on the name of the Lord. And men in there is done in italics, showing you that it's not just talking about everybody, but there were men that eventually began calling on the name of the Lord now. So in all of that other part, they were unaware somehow, just didn't know it even went on. I think this is a good place to end it right here. But so at that point, they called upon the Lord. And to show you down here, this is footnotes. And again, this is at Bible Hub here. This is the breath of life, or nothing. And then tells you Genesis 4:3, this is at the end of the days. At the end of days. So what's that supposed to mean? Because end of days, and that's Armageddon and everything. Yeah, you know, how many generations have been sitting around talking about the end of days? You know, one of the oldest deciphered cuneiform tablets that we have dated today is a man bitching about his children and telling you about the good old days, the golden time 50 years ago whenever he was a kid and everything, but the kids nowadays, and he claims that it's the end of days is coming, that he's seen it, just like we would think of today with all this crap going on, and people start saying, Jesus is about to come. Jesus already had his little thing come in. He was Titus. That was the second coming and so on. That's already gone through its deal. You don't believe it worked out right. That was the Roman Catholic Church. It's still in power today, and everything is wilted from that. So you can have a big cup of coffee and wake the hell up to the reality of how this all works. But in reality, with all the things that we're talking about supposedly have gone on, there is about 12, isn't that a strange number, instances of super magic that go on here. There's also talking snakes and all kinds of things that happen that really doesn't quite add up. Go to the land of Nod, so there's already a land named of something, and then got Enoch, and he builds a city. Well, a city requires a whole lot of people. Otherwise, it's called Hut. They didn't build a hut. It ended up being a city real quick. So where'd all these people come from, multiplying like crazy? Are we talking about people or rabbits? What the hell's going on here? Well, it's just a story on how people multiplied out like crazy. You know, way before this story has started, that there were hundreds of thousands of people living back and stuff that we even have records of. But then as the records go away, the places don't go away, and it keeps going back. And I said 35 years ago that one day we're going to find this and that and the other, and it's going to change everything. Once we found Göbekli Tepe and then we're start deciphering it, we can see it changes everything. But then again, in between there, we've already found terrazzo concrete floors and things that I've talked about, the age of bread, these people building these stone bowls that are crazy. Catalhoyuk and all the places there that there was already civilization going on. The ancient Neptunes that apparently spread out far and wide, deep into Africa, and made all those little circles, weird stones that are out there that they find hundreds of, thousands of really in the Black Desert there, that's been found in Jordan also, so it's the same thing. And what was funny is they were all looking into it, but then whenever they found it, and then somebody put two and two together like I did and said, same thing, same people, everything, they just quit talking about it, don't want to get into it anymore. Didn't seem like they ever really wanted to, because they probably knew where it was leading. So there's that new sun again. There's a brand new sun. For after a sunset, then you have a night, and then a brand new sun comes up, and then that's the time that they call finally on the Lord. And of course, you start to see some echoing going on here just in this first little bit where Cain sues Abel, but then these guys do it again right here, and he says that, well, if it's sevenfold, it's 77-fold. We're going to leave it here, guys, but strange stories that are in the Bible, and how it, got to the point where they wanted to have some type of competition between Cain and Abel. And so there was a gardener already, and there were people that were already raising goats and flocks and things like that. So there was already animal husbandry going on. And whenever they were giving sacrifices and just doing vegetables, the people decided, well, it'd be better to give something that's really alive like that. Well, vegetables and stuff are alive too. By the way, whenever we rot into the soil and we slowly push up daisies, no matter what, vegans, we end up feeding them. So, oh my God, they're eating you. Oh, full circle there on that. But it's a better sacrifice, huh? Well, what's even better than that? Well, people. And it got to that at point too. But this whole creation story that people see, is Adam and Eve, and here she is giving him the apple and so on. In fact, she's got a whole bunch of them. The pomegranate was in that area that was there. The golden apples of the Hesperides is where we get it from in our Bible, and the twist of the Greeks that wrote the story and twisted it up too. But then there's also the mandrake, which is known as the love apple. And a lot of people have made that connection to how Adam and Eve got together. But we're left to believe that this is someplace like a Blue Lagoon where they grew up and they didn't know any better about things, and then all of a sudden she catches her periods and hair starts growing in weird places, and then they want to cover up somewhat. Innocence is gone, they have sex and so on, and all of that stuff. And if you look at that, that's kind of a weird Adam and Eve happening again on a castaways on an island. But that's kind of the idea that we have here, and people were innocent. So if they're innocent, then there's no original sin, because it even says there that if you're innocent, well, it's before they ate of it. So whenever they ate of it, then this happens. Well, he told them not to. See how that fixes itself? Peace.